Hey there, good evening. Nice to see you. It's time for the Bronx Buzz. And in case you don't know, of course, where have you been? This is BronxNet's program where we talk to reporters, writers, editors, journalists. People put stuff out in the Bronx so you could get an idea of what they're thinking about, maybe a little more insight than when you just read it in the newspaper or online. And in our second segment today, we're going to actually talk to a BronxNet person who is doing something real special. But right now, let's go downtown and say good evening to Annie McDonough, who's the Deputy City Hall reporter at the great city and state New York. Annie, nice to see you.
Thanks, Gary, so much for having me.
So the big news, really, and it is pretty big news that came out of City Hall is a story you wrote about, and that is that the City Council overrode the mayor's vetoes on two law enforcement bills. There you can see the headline from Annie's story. It's called the How Many Stops Act. So why don't we just review that act, and of course, then the ban against solitary confinement in a way is secondary because the How Many Stops Act is front and center. So what the heck happened? The mayor was not
Yes,
happy, was he?
not happy, and it was really a maybe a month or so of a concerted public campaign by the mayor to turn public opinion and also turn council members against these bills. That the first one you mentioned, how many stops, will require more police reporting on lower level investigative encounters with civilians. The second, as you mentioned, would ban solitary confinement in city jails and also limit other uses of things like restrictive housing in city jails. These are two bills that Mayor Adams and his, allies in law enforcement have said will endanger public safety, endanger correction staff and detainees in city jails. And they, unleashed sort of a very public and concerted PR campaign to portray them as such. They passed it at the city council in late December of last year with veto-proof majorities, but the mayor was working hard to peel a couple members off and get them to not support the bills in a veto override vote. Ultimately, what happened is both bills in the council's vote to override the mayor's veto, both bills passed with a larger number of votes
Yes, it
than they both
was a
originally passed with.
it,
Yeah.
it, would, it was a startling rebuke. Now I'm going to fill
Yeah.
you in of something that you are not aware of about this, which is fascinating for me. And I was just actually looking it up here. I think it goes back to 2012. I did a show because one of the big dialogues, especially in the Bronx, was stop and frisk. And at that time, now Mayor Adams was Senator Eric Adams, and he came on the show as a former police detective talking about the importance of reining in the police force and having quote unquote what was it, stop and frisk, I forgot
Yeah.
the formal name of it, and have stop and frisk be something that police officers had to be really careful about. In other words, he was on the other side of the issue. And now it's just fascinating to me that when they want to put in stricter requirements for police officers if they stop somebody, and now all of a sudden he's on the other side. And
Right.
he's very, very, very interesting. And it was I just looked it up. It was 2012, so it's
Okay.
12 years ago. But that's kind
Yeah.
of interesting. His development or transformation as a public official is fascinating to me.
And people have brought that up. He was a very strong critic of stop and frisk in the way that the
Stop,
department
question, and
stop
frisk
question.
was the
Yeah.
name of it. Okay, I got it.
The way the department has, shown to stop overwhelmingly Black and Latino New Yorkers, and trying to call out the need for transparency there. What the administration has argued in its, case against this bill is that these are not those kinds of stops. These are lower level encounters where there's not necessarily a suspicion of criminal activity with the civilian that the officer is stopping, but they're sort of lower level fact finding
Yeah, like
encounters.
kids hanging out on a stoop in front of a building, maybe making a little too much noise or creating a disturbance, and there's some concern. other than just cordial hello, how you guys doing, if they start asking or look in pockets or do something like that, then this bill would require some paperwork on it. And it's not
Yeah,
paperwork, it's
right. It can be reported on phones, as the council has pointed out.
right.
And that's really a central sort of point of debate here with the council and the mayor, is exactly what kind of encounters will be included. And our administration has argued that casual conversations, just stopping to check in about the neighborhood, say, hey, how's it going,
Right.
on your block today, that would be included. The council has said explicitly that it wouldn't.
Would
So I
not
think
be.
that we're going to watch implementation here really carefully to see what happens. And I think
And
everyone's going to be watching implementation very carefully.
and I have to tell you, and this has stuck in my mind during that era back then. I get when we were taking phone calls on, excuse me, on the show. I got a phone call from because we were discussing this issue, from a young man who says, I work overnight, so it was about midnight or so, and I was going. I think it was the number 5 train over there in the East Bronx. I was going into the number 5 train, just on my way to my overnight job. I don't remember what the job was, and they detained me, and I was like, I got no weapons on me. I haven't done anything wrong. And they deliberately held me in the station. I said, I'm going to be late for work. And then the train came and they deliberately held me longer just to be annoying to me. And that stuck in my head as something that was real harassment. So we'll see how it plays. In your story, you talked about Councilman Eric Dinowitz, who talked about that because they did these ride-alongs, council members did a ride-along, and said that he didn't see it as being intrusive to their ability to do their work. So if that's any justification for the override, well, there it is.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was hard on that ride along to see how it will be implemented, because it hasn't been implemented yet. But the idea of that ride along was really to show council members that, hey, there's a lot of administrative work that officers have to do. And that was part of the argument that the mayor was putting forward. But as you said, Councilmember Dinowitz and others have said, it's a legitimate concern to think about how much administrative work they are doing and not, have duplicative work. But they've said they're voting for this bill because they don't see it as something that will create that kind of burden.
With all the pressure on the mayor over Rikers, and that's another show. That's a full show to really talk about that. But the banning of solitary confinement seems to, and this is Gary, you can put editorial opinion, it seems to me to be just completely logical. The one thing you don't want to do is make people more dysfunctional about being locked up, and make it more difficult for them to somehow emerge from their situation. I personally don't understand why anybody would oppose something like that, especially in New York in that horrible environment at Rikers Island.
Yeah, so the administration's response to the solitary confinement bill, or ban rather, has been that there is not solitary confinement in city jails. And that is a little bit of a specific
You're
argument
so
about
kind.
terms.
Annie, you're so kind. That's a little bit
Well,
of
no,
a
it's important to,
law.
it's important to point out that that is not the case. That is a little bit of a disingenuous argument, because there is something called punitive segregation, which allows
Of course.
jails to keep inmates isolated
Yeah,
for most of the
isolate. Yeah,
day. Yeah.
right.
And so this bill would change and limit those restrictive abilities to keep people in restrictive housing. And this is something that, unfortunately, because of less public oversight and insight into how city jails work, it's going to be more difficult to see how that plays out. But certainly that was hard fought.
You are really kind, because there's been less oversight. Oh, you mean no oversight? But that's
right.
Thing.
It's going to be difficult to see how that plays out, because we don't get a very good view
of course,
into city jails.
Anyway, I wanted to talk about something else, and let's see, we're recording this on Tuesday the 6th. It'll air on Thursday. But this morning, when I woke up and, of course, checked my first read on City and State New York, I just loved the headline. And the headline was, "It's Tin Cup Day." And Eric Adams has a wish list. And those of us, of course, who live in the city know what, when you walk around with a tin cup, what what that's like. I love the headline. That was like, oh, Annie has a. I don't know if you wrote it or somebody in the office wrote
I
it,
think
but
someone else wrote it.
oh, okay. So let's talk about now. I guess today would be the day that he is up in Albany. What's it? He wants to replace 421A, right?
That's part of it. Yeah, he just finished his testimony this morning, and he was the first to go off in a long line of other local leaders. He's got essentially four main priorities that he's emphasized. One is replacing 421A and creating other tools to build affordable housing more flexibly, like easing office residential conversions and allowing basement apartments a path legalization. Another is extending mayoral control of schools. Another is additional funding for the city's asylum seeker costs.
And the other was cannabis, right?
Exactly. Yep,
Yeah.
that's it.
Cracking down on illegal cannabis. But, I guess we can even start there. They don't have the teeth that they need and legally to really shut this industry down. I mean, that seems clear.
And the mayor has said that, given that authority, the city will act very quickly to do so. The Hochul administration, Governor Kathy Hochul, did address that in her budget.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just about getting the legislature to sign on at this point.
And the mayoral control of schools, listen, we can debate that, or they can debate that. But what would be the alternative? We've had the alternative. And if you say, okay, no mayoral control, we're going to put some other system in place. I'd be surprised if the legislature had the stomach to try and do something else, even if they don't like what's going on with the mayoral control.
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair assessment. I think that there doesn't seem a strong chance that mayoral control won't happen. Perhaps it won't be extended for 4 years, as the mayor has asked for, and as Kathy Hochul has asked for. Maybe more likely that it will be 2 years. Maybe it'll get done outside the budget process. Robert Jackson said this morning that he doesn't want to extend mayoral control past when the current mayor is in office, and mayor's term is up at the end of 2 years from now. So,
well, that's I didn't know that was out there, but so that gives them 2 years to figure out how to reconvene the Board of Education.
No, sorry. So it would just be up for renewal again.
For renewal again.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so he wants to re-talk about it, I guess, in his mind, depending who the mayor might be. Listen, there's a ton of stuff to talk about as regards all this. The whole asylum seeker thing, he just wants money. And I don't mean selfishly. I mean for the programs. He's getting stuck all over the place. All right.
Yep.
Annie, we do got to run. We value every precious moment with you because we're up here in the northernmost borough. We got to know what's going on at City Hall. And so Annie McDonough, the Deputy City Hall reporter for City and State New York, thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Gary.
Great. Okay, we're going to take a short break. And as I said, we're going to meet somebody from BronxNet who if you haven't met her, you're going to enjoy it. Don't go away.